Well, it's that time again for another summary video. Over this last week, we have covered a lot within the life of King David, from him becoming king to him almost losing his kingship. Let's begin in 85. This is after Saul has been killed, and David is now going to Hebron. So in episode 85, we covered 2 Samuel 2 and 3. David has gone back into Hebron, and he has said he's sought the counsel of God. Where should we go? I should go into Hebron. And he lives in the town of Hebron, and he is anointed king there. And it comes down here. It says, "In the house of Judah anointed me king over them." And we see that David was going to reign in Hebron for 7 years and 6 months. That's how long he's going to be there. Remember that David is king total for 40 years. And so 33 years over all of Israel in Jerusalem and 7.5 years in Hebron. This is also where Abner, the son of Ner, he is still kind of the commander of Saul's remaining army. He is over Saul's kingdom-ish, and he has brought into power Saul's son Ishbosheth. And so the pool of Gibeon is where Joab and Abner kind of face off for their first time. And they have 12 men from each side fight each other, and they all die. And then Joab pursues the people of Saul. And so Joab and his brothers Abishai and Asael, they're all at war. Asael is killed by Abner, which of course is going to tick off Joab, and he's going to kill Abner later. But David is trying to take, he's rising to power. Ishbosheth, the king that has replaced Saul's son, who's going to be king for 2 years. Ishbosheth he accuses Abner of sleeping with Saul's maidservant. And Abner goes, "You know what? I'm done with you. I'm going to go and bring all the kingdom into David like it has been prophesied. All the kingdom is coming to David." And so Abner goes to David and says, "Look, let me help you become king over all of Israel. Let me help you become the king in this land." And David says, "Sure, you can help me." And Abner decides to go throughout Israel and begin to kind of rally the people to David. Joab meets Abner along the way. Joab is still holding a grudge over Abner killing Joab's brother, so Joab puts Abner to death, and David mourns Abner's death and says, "May the blood guilt of Joab come on his own head. I didn't have anything to do with this." After some time has passed, David is anointed king over all of Israel, right? So 7.5 years have passed between 2 Samuel 3 and 2 Samuel 4. And so now we're in episode 86. David is anointed king over all of Israel. He finds out that Jonathan, his good friend Jonathan, has a son named Mephibosheth, who at this point would be about 12 years old. He was 5 years old when Saul and Jonathan died. And now it's been 7 more years. So Mephibosheth at this point is about 12 to 13 years old. And this is the son of Jonathan, who lived in Lodabar, that David brings into his household and lets live with him, and he cares for him. Now, 2 servants of Ishbosheth go in and kill Ishbosheth, and they escape to David, and they're like, "Hey, we killed Saul's son for you. You're welcome." And David goes, "No, look, I've never lifted up my hand against the Lord's anointed. When somebody thought he was bringing me good news about Saul's death, I killed him. How much more so when you've killed a righteous man, an innocent man in his own bed?" And he puts those 2 men to death. But now David is anointed king over all of Israel. He'll be king total for 40 years, as we've said, 33 in Israel total. And all the elders come to him. This is the part where we see that, I don't know, it's kind of interesting because we've seen all these people gather to David. And over the course of the 7 years he was in Hebron, he's had an army of nearly 300,000 people defect from Israel to Judah to follow David. I have always thought this was interesting because there are kind of like 3 different positions of David. So there's David hiding in the wilderness from King Saul with his little band of soldiers, about 600 people total. And then David becomes king in Hebron, and more people start to gather to him. And then he becomes king over all of Israel. And now the entire nation sees him. And I know it's not a perfect picture. I can't pretend that it is a perfect picture. But what I have always kind of thought of is, because David's a picture of Christ, that we do know, I've always kind of thought it interesting, like, David wandering in the wilderness and having just a few people following him is kind of like the Gospels, where Jesus had just a few people following him, a few people who put faith in him and kind of believed in him. And then now David goes from being in the wilderness to being in Hebron. And people from all over Israel begin to gather to him. And I kind of feel like that's where we are right now with the story of Jesus, that Jesus is king, and people from all over the globe are coming to Jesus. And then there will come a day that David became king in Jerusalem and he reigned over everything. And there will come a day that Jesus will come back and reign in Jerusalem and reign over everything. And so I'm not saying it's a perfect picture, but it's something that I've always contemplated. David, after he's established as king in Jerusalem, episode 87, he wants to bring the Ark of the Covenant back to Jerusalem. That does not go well for him, because even though Moses had written back in Deuteronomy 17 that any king you have of Israel should write a copy of the law for himself and study it every day, David clearly has not. And they move the Ark of the Covenant on an ox cart, and Uzzah is struck down. David grieves over this. He's angry over it, in fact, the Bible says. But later he reconsiders. He clearly has read the law. He now recognizes that only the Levites, and specifically the Kohathites, are supposed to carry the Ark of the Covenant. And he brings the Ark of the Covenant back into Jerusalem. Now, at this point, the tent of meeting is at Gibeon, and the Ark of the Covenant is in Jerusalem in a separate tent. And so from this point forward, until Solomon builds the temple, and we'll see that in Kings, from this point forward, the tent of meeting will be in one place and the Ark of the Covenant will be in Jerusalem. So the tent of meeting, where the priests are doing their priestly duty, is in Gibeon, and the Ark of the Covenant is in Jerusalem. And that's a little bit strange that he doesn't keep it in the Holy of Holies. There's a little bit of weirdness to that. But God makes a covenant with David and promises David, this is episode 88, God promises David that, look, I am going to let one of your descendants sit on your throne and reign on your throne forever. It is a reference to Solomon in part, but it is also a reference to Christ, as we see in the New Testament. And so at this point, we see again the people of Asaph, we see Asaph and his brothers. Asaph is responsible for 12 of the Psalms, Psalm 50 and Psalm 73 through 83. And these are going to be some of the people who, when the temple is actually finally built by Solomon, will lead in the worship in the temple and will help people to come to know the Lord. And so David thanks God. He worships before the ark, and which is also strange. It's strange that David's worshiping before the ark, because as I pointed out to you, only the Kohathites were allowed to move it, to actually touch it, but you weren't even allowed to look at it. Like the high priest, before it was supposed to be moved, the high priest was supposed to cover it. Only the high priest was allowed to look at it. And so this idea that David is in the presence of the Ark of the Covenant and worshiping is I've always thought is just a little bit strange. But David wants to build the Lord a palace. David wants to build the Lord a temple. And David goes, no, it's not for you to do it. I'll let your son do it. And he will follow me, and I will use him to bring me glory and to build me a house. Episode 89 was David and Bathsheba, easily David's most grievous sin. And his army, his people are at war, and David sees Bathsheba on the roof of her house bathing. He calls her to himself. He realizes that her husband is at war. He sleeps with her, gets her pregnant. She tells him, I'm pregnant, and then he orchestrates a plan to cover up his sin, ultimately ends up killing her husband. And Nathan comes to David in chapter 12 of 2 Samuel and rebukes David and says, because of this sin that you have done, the son born to you in Bathsheba will die. And that son does die on the seventh day. And then David has sex with his wife again, and now they have the son Solomon. Solomon will come through Bathsheba. But there's just kind of this callousness, I think, a little bit. Like David, when he's finally confronted by Nathan, like he's callous before that. He doesn't care that he put Uriah to death. He's just trying to cover his own skin. He's just trying to cover his own guilt. He wants to hide it. There's nothing noble about it. When Nathan finally rebukes him, we get the 51st Psalm where David repents, and he repents in dust and ashes. And he says, from conception, I've been birthed in sin. I'm steeped in sin. And he asks God for forgiveness. And it's a fantastic Psalm. It's just unfortunate that it had to be written, right? Because that shouldn't have happened. The sin shouldn't have happened. In episode 90, we get Amnon, Tamar, and Absalom. And I wonder a little bit if Amnon doesn't violate his sister Tamar because of his father's example with Bathsheba. Like, right? David's the king. He takes Bathsheba because he wants Bathsheba. Amnon is the king's son. He wants to sleep with his sister Tamar. Why not? And Amnon and Absalom, both these two particular sons of David, just kind of do whatever they want to do. So Amnon rapes his sister Tamar. She flees. Absalom plots for 2 years the death of Amnon, finally puts Amnon to death. Absalom flees for 3 years. He gets brought back to Jerusalem, still doesn't get to see his dad for 2 more years, and then gets to see his dad. And it's all just, there's a couple of places in the text where it says, and David didn't say anything to them. David didn't speak anything to them. David didn't, and you just kind of go, what is wrong with David? Why isn't he rebuking his sons? Why isn't he dealing with this sin? And I cannot help but wonder if it's because he's got in his mind his sin with Bathsheba, and he's like, man, I don't really have much room to talk. I don't know if that's it or not, but David does not restrain his sons. It makes me think a little bit, not a lot, of Eli and Hophni and Phinehas, where Eli does not restrain his sons, and David doesn't restrain his sons. And then as a result of all of this, Absalom seeks to put himself in power, and we talked about that in episode 91, where Absalom sits outside the city gates, and he's got a chariot. He's got 50 men that run before him everywhere he goes to kind of make him look impressive. And he begins to win the hearts of the people of Israel, going, oh, my dad doesn't have time to talk to you, but I have time to talk to you. And he does this for about, like we talked about, 4 years, probably not 40. And he does this for a while, and all of Israel comes to him. And then Absalom goes to Hebron, where David was first anointed king, and he has himself anointed king there. And the people say Absalom is king, and then Absalom begins to make his march to Jerusalem, and David and his men flee Jerusalem. And then we get to meet Ittai the Gittite, who actually ends up becoming one of the generals of David's army. And we have Absalom behaving as king and David fleeing. We have the 3rd Psalm that was written by David as he fled his son Absalom. And then we have the battle where Absalom's instruction is, let's just kill David and be done with it. And David's instruction is kill everybody but Absalom. And Absalom is put to death by Joab. And there's just, I don't know, there's so much bad here. There's so much sin here, and there's so much wickedness here. And it's interesting because, people are like, oh man, we need to make the Bible into a movie, so that we could show it to our kids, or show it, like, it would be a dark movie. It would definitely be rated R. It would be dark until you get to Jesus, right? So that's why we have stuff out there that tell the story of Jesus. That's the good news. The good news is Christ. But David returns back to Jerusalem, having had his son defeated and having had this kind of battle overthrown. And now he is back in power to live out the rest of his days, which at this point aren't many. He's already been king for a long time, and his days are coming quickly to a close. And that is the recap of this past week. Thank you so much for journeying with us today at Simpler Bible. Together, you and I have looked at another passage of Scripture and come to know the Bible a little bit better and enjoy God more fully. This video, along with all of our videos, can be found at simplerbible.com, where you can enjoy our Through the Bible in a Year course. You can also enjoy a wealth of resources, blog posts that take you a little bit deeper into the text, a Bible study format that you can use with your small groups or your family, and we're creating new content all the time, all with the commitment to help us be people who know and enjoy God more fully. Thank you so much for being part of it, and we can't wait to see you next time.